The fluorescent lights hummed their monotonous song through the corridors of Naval Amphibious Base Coronado at 04:45 hours, casting sterile white light across freshly mopped floors. Commander Sarah Chen pushed the industrial mop bucket with practiced efficiency, her movements economical and precise, too precise perhaps for someone whose job description ended at custodial services. But nobody noticed. Nobody ever really looked at the janitors. She wore faded blue coveralls with base maintenance stenciled across the back in block letters that had seen better days. Her dark hair was pulled into a tight, practical bun, and her face was free of makeup, showing the kind of plain functionality that made people's eyes slide past without registering details, exactly as intended. Through the windows, she could see the first hints of dawn breaking over the Pacific, silhouetting the obstacle course where Bud-S candidates would soon be suffering through another day of Hell Week. The distant sound of surf mixed with the closer noise of industrial air conditioning, creating the base's perpetual white noise soundtrack. Sarah paused her mopping to adjust the bucket, and for just a moment, anyone paying attention might have noticed how her hands moved, calloused in the wrong places for cleaning work, scarred along the knuckles in patterns that came from tactical training, not household accidents. But the two young SEALs who passed by weren't paying attention. They were deep in conversation about the previous night's bar crawl, their voices carrying that particular brand of exhausted confidence that came from surviving training that broke most men. And then Rodriguez actually tried to tell the Master Chief that he could do more pull-ups than... The speaker's voice cut off as they rounded the corner, leaving Sarah alone again with her mop and her observations. She resumed cleaning, but her eyes never stopped moving. 3 months undercover, and she'd documented 47 security vulnerabilities, identified 3 potential insider threats, and mapped every blind spot in the base's surveillance system. The counterintelligence assessment was nearly complete, just a few more weeks of being invisible, of being dismissed, of being the person nobody really saw. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to Military and Veteran Stories so you never miss these true tales of courage. And tell us in the comments, where are you watching from today? The main entrance doors banged open, and a group of 6 SEALs entered from morning PT, their conversation loud and energized despite the early hour. Sarah moved her bucket aside to give them room, keeping her eyes down in the universal posture of service workers everywhere, present but not intrusive, there but not really there. "Watch it," one of them said, not unkindly as he sidestepped her mop. He was maybe 25, with the kind of lean, hard physique that came from swimming in cold ocean water with boats strapped to your head. "Floors slippery." "Yes, sir," Sarah replied quietly, the words automatic and unremarkable. The group continued past, and she caught fragments of their conversation, something about an upcoming training exercise, someone named Davidson who couldn't shoot straight, the eternal complaint about military coffee, normal, routine, exactly what these hallways should sound like. But then a different voice cut through the casual banter, sharp with annoyance. "Jesus Christ, does maintenance really need to be doing this during operational hours?" Lieutenant Marcus Dawson emerged from the administrative wing, his uniform crisp despite the early hour, his expression showing the kind of irritation that came from someone who believed their schedule should dictate everyone else's. "We've got classified briefings in these corridors. Security protocols exist for a reason." Sarah kept her expression neutral, kept mopping. She'd encountered Dawson multiple times over the past month, and each interaction had followed the same pattern. He was young for his rank, late 20s probably, with the kind of aggressive ambition that made him see everything as either an asset or an obstacle to his career advancement. Janitors apparently fell into the latter category. "Just doing my job, sir," she said, voice flat and professional. Your job is to clean when we're not here, Dawson snapped back. This is a SEAL training facility, not some shopping mall. We can't have random civilians wandering around during operational hours. The implied accusation stung more than he could possibly know, but Sarah's face remained impassive. I have proper security clearance, sir. Base commander approved my schedule personally. Dawson's eyes narrowed. He stepped closer and Sarah could smell his cologne, something expensive and aggressive that probably cost more than her monthly salary as a maintenance worker. His gaze traveled over her coveralls with obvious disdain, then stopped suddenly on her left arm. The sleeve had ridden up slightly when she'd adjusted her grip on the mop, revealing the edge of a tattoo, dark ink against her skin, intricate detail work that was unmistakably professional and military in style. What the hell is that? Dawson's voice rose, attracting attention from the SEALs who'd been heading toward the locker rooms. Are you serious right now? Sarah realized her mistake and tried to pull the sleeve back down, but Dawson grabbed her wrist, not violently, but with enough authority to stop her movement. The touch sent alarm bells through her trained instincts, but she forced herself to remain still, to play the role. Let me see that, he demanded, pushing the sleeve up further. What emerged was the upper portion of an elaborate tattoo, wings, intricate featherwork, and beneath them the unmistakable shape of a Navy SEAL trident. The craftsmanship was exceptional, the detail work showing specific design elements that any SEAL would recognize as authentic unit markers. The corridor fell silent. You've got to be kidding me, Dawson said, his voice dripping with contempt. He released her wrist and stepped back, his expression shifting from annoyance to outright anger. Stolen valor right here on our own base. This is unbelievable. Sir, Sarah began, but Dawson cut her off. No, don't even try to explain. He raised his voice, addressing the SEALs who had stopped to watch the confrontation. Gentlemen, take a good look at this. This is what stolen valor looks like. Some civilian janitor walking around our base with a trident tattoo, probably telling people at bars that she's a Navy SEAL. Heat crept up Sarah's neck, but she kept her breathing steady, kept her posture neutral. The mission required her to maintain cover. Her personal pride, her desire to defend herself, her instinct to put this arrogant lieutenant in his place, all of it had to be secondary to the operation. But it cost her. Every word from Dawson's mouth felt like a small blade, cutting precisely at places she'd earned the right to be proud of. I never claimed to be anything I'm not, she said quietly. It's just a tattoo, sir. Just a tattoo. Dawson's laugh was harsh and humorless. That's a sacred symbol. Men die earning the right to wear that trident. Do you have any idea what Bud S is, what Hell Week means? The 70% attrition rate? One of the younger SEALs stepped forward, his face showing genuine offense now. Ma'am, with all due respect, why would you get a SEAL trident tattooed if you didn't serve? That's really disrespectful to people who actually went through the program. Sarah met his eyes and saw no malice there, just honest confusion and hurt. He was maybe 23, probably just graduated from training, still carrying the raw pride of someone who'd accomplished something genuinely difficult. She wanted to tell him that she understood, that she'd been through Hell Week herself 7 years ago, that she knew exactly what that trident cost because she'd paid the same price. Instead, she said, I meant no disrespect. I should get back to work. Yeah, you should, Dawson agreed. But first, I'm going to need to see your security credentials. If you've been lying about your clearance level 2, you're going to be off this base by noon. He held out his hand expectantly, and Sarah had no choice but to reach into her coverall pocket and produce her ID badge. It was legitimate, had to be, since it went through the same security scanners as everyone else's. but it identified her only as S. Chen, Maintenance Services, Secret Clearance. Dawson studied it with obvious suspicion, then handed it back. Secret clearance for a janitor. Interesting. Somebody's got friends in high places, I guess. The implication was clear. She'd somehow gamed the system, used connections or favors to get clearance she didn't deserve. Sarah accepted the ID back without comment. Lieutenant Dawson, a new voice interrupted. Senior Chief Marcus Martinez emerged from the physical training office, his weathered face showing the kind of calm authority that came from 25 years of service and 3 combat deployments. He was one of the instructors for Bud S candidates, respected by everyone on base, and his presence immediately shifted the dynamic in the corridor. Senior Chief, Dawson acknowledged, his tone becoming marginally more professional. Martinez's eyes moved from Dawson to Sarah, lingering for a moment on her exposed tattoo before meeting her gaze. Something flickered in his expression. Recognition, maybe, or at least curiosity. He'd been watching her for the past few weeks, Sarah knew, had noticed things that others missed, the way she moved, the way she observed, the subtle signs that her background might include more than cleaning experience. "Is there a problem here?" Martinez asked, his voice neutral but carrying weight. "Just addressing a stolen valor situation, Senior Chief," Dawson replied. "This civilian contractor has a seal trident tattooed on her arm. I was explaining why that's inappropriate." Martinez stepped closer, and Sarah fought the instinct to come to attention. He studied the visible portion of her tattoo with the kind of careful attention that made her pulse quicken. Unlike Dawson, Martinez was actually looking at the details. The specific style of the trident, the way the wings curved, the small marks that indicated campaign service. "Where did you get this done?" Martinez asked, his tone more curious than accusatory. "Virginia Beach," Sarah replied. It was true, technically. The tattoo artist had been a retired SEAL himself, someone who would have refused to ink that trident on anyone who hadn't earned it. "About 7 years ago." "Virginia Beach," Martinez repeated slowly. "Near Little Creek." "Yes, Senior Chief." Something in his expression shifted, but he kept whatever thoughts he had to himself. "Ms. Chen has proper clearance to be here, Lieutenant. If you have concerns about her credentials, you can file a formal complaint with base security. Otherwise, I suggest we let her get back to work. This hallway needs to be cleared before the Aero 600 briefing." Dawson looked like he wanted to argue, but Martinez's rank and reputation made that a losing proposition. "Fine, but I'm going to be watching, Ms. Chen. If I find out you've been lying about anything, clearance, background, whatever, you're gone." "Understood, sir," Sarah said quietly. The group dispersed, though not without several of the younger SEALs throwing disgusted looks back at her. Sarah returned to her mopping, but the careful invisibility she'd cultivated was now compromised. People would be watching her more closely now, noticing her in ways that could complicate the mission. Senior Chief Martinez lingered after the others had left. He pretended to check his watch, to adjust his uniform, but Sarah could feel his attention on her. "Virginia Beach," he said again, almost to himself. 7 years ago, that would be 2016, 2017. 2017, Sarah confirmed, keeping her eyes on the mop. Busy year in Virginia Beach. A lot of East Coast teams were rotating through. Training cycles, deployments, the usual chaos. He paused. "You know, in my experience, most people don't just randomly get SEAL tridents tattooed on their bodies. Usually means something. Usually has a story." Sarah's hands tightened slightly on the mop handle. Martinez was fishing, but he was doing it intelligently, the way someone with actual tactical experience approached a situation where they suspected there was more happening than appeared on the surface. "Everyone's got a story, Senior Chief," she replied. "Mine's just not very interesting, I should really finish this hallway before the morning rush. Martinez nodded slowly, but his eyes never left her face. Fair enough. But Ms. Chen, a word of advice. People around here, they take that trident seriously. Real seriously. If you're wearing it for the right reasons, well, maybe someday you can explain those reasons, but if you're not. He left the threat unspoken, but the implication was clear. I understand, Senior Chief. Thank you for the advice. He walked away, but Sarah noticed that he glanced back twice before disappearing around the corner. She'd made it onto his radar now, which was both a complication and potentially an asset. Martinez was the kind of operator who trusted his instincts, and his instincts were clearly telling him that something about her didn't add up. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of sideways glances and whispered conversations. Word had spread, as word always did on military bases, about the janitor with the stolen valor tattoo. Several times Sarah caught groups of SEALs staring at her, their expressions ranging from disgust to pity to anger. During her lunch break, she sat alone in the civilian contractor's break room, eating a sandwich she'd brought from home and reviewing her mental notes about the security assessment. 3 more weeks. Just 3 more weeks, and she could finish documenting the last few vulnerabilities, write her report, and get back to her actual life. The door opened and 2 female sailors entered, heading for the vending machines. They didn't notice Sarah at first, too engrossed in their conversation. Can't believe someone would do that, one was saying. Like, doesn't she realize people died earning that symbol? Maybe she doesn't understand military culture, her friend replied. Some civilians just see it as cool artwork or whatever. It's not cool, it's disrespectful. My brother went through Bud S, and he still has nightmares about Hell Week. Seeing someone who didn't earn it wearing that trident like it's just a fashion statement, it's disgusting. They noticed Sarah then, and their conversation cut off abruptly. The first sailor, a petty officer 2nd class, by her rank insignia, stared at Sarah with obvious disapproval. Must be nice, she said, her voice cold, getting to play dress-up without actually having to do any of the hard work. Sarah met her gaze steadily but didn't respond. What could she say that wouldn't compromise the mission? That she'd completed Hell Week in the winter class of 2017, that she'd done it while recovering from a bullet wound that had barely finished healing, that the instructors had made her redo 3 evolutions, specifically because they didn't believe a woman could maintain the standard, and she'd exceeded requirements every single time. The silence stretched, and finally the 2 sailors grabbed their drinks and left, their disgust palpable. Sarah finished her sandwich alone, tasting nothing. The afternoon brought more of the same. Lieutenant Dawson seemed to have made it his personal mission to ensure everyone knew about the stolen valor janitor. He mentioned it during a team briefing that Sarah happened to be cleaning near, his voice loud enough to carry through the open door. And just shows you can't trust anyone these days. Civilians walking around wearing our symbols like their costume jewelry. Several SEALs began making pointed comments whenever they passed her in the hallways. Nothing overtly hostile. They were professionals after all, but enough to make their feelings clear. Must be nice to get the trident without actually having to swim in the freezing ocean for 6 months, one muttered as he passed. Wonder if she's got a Medal of Honor tattoo hidden somewhere too, another joked, his friends laughing. The worst part wasn't the comments themselves. Sarah had endured worse, much worse, in actual combat situations. The worst part was knowing that their anger came from a legitimate place, from genuine respect for something she'd earned just as much as they had, but couldn't defend. By 1600 hours, when her shift technically ended, Sarah's jaw ached from clenching it. She returned her cleaning supplies to the maintenance office, changed out of her coveralls in the civilian locker room, and headed for the parking lot in jeans and a plain black t-shirt. Senior Chief Martinez was waiting by her car, a 15-year-old Honda Civic that fit perfectly with her maintenance worker persona. "Ms. Chen," he greeted her. "Got a minute?" Sarah's training screamed warnings, but she kept her expression neutral. "Of course, Senior Chief. What can I do for you?" Martinez leaned against the car next to hers, his posture casual but his eyes sharp. "I've been thinking about that tattoo of yours. The detail work is really something. Professional quality. The kind of work you get from someone who knows what they're doing, who understands the symbolism." "I found a good artist," Sarah replied carefully. "Yeah, I bet you did." Martinez pulled out his phone, tapped a few times, then turned the screen toward her. "See, here's the thing. I've been around long enough to recognize certain patterns. The way you move, the way you observe things, the way you reacted when Dawson grabbed your wrist this morning. Most civilians would have jerked away, but you stayed controlled, assessed the threat level, then deliberately chose not to respond. That's training, Ms. Chen. That's muscle memory." Sarah said nothing, but her mind raced. Martinez was more perceptive than she'd anticipated. "And that tattoo," he continued, pulling up a photo on his phone. "I've seen trident tattoos from probably 200 different guys over my career. Most of them get similar work. Use the same handful of artists near the major bases. But yours has some interesting details. Those small marks near the anchor, those look like campaign ribbons. Specific campaigns, East Africa, Philippines, Syria." Her heart rate increased, but her breathing remained steady. "Like I said, good artist. Attention to detail." "Right, except those 3 campaigns?" Martinez's voice dropped lower. "There's only been a handful of female operators who saw action in all 3, and most of them are still active duty. So either you're the unluckiest stolen valor case I've ever seen, managed to get a tattoo with details that perfectly match extremely classified operations, or—" He let the sentence hang, waiting for her to fill in the blank. Sarah met his eyes directly. "Or I should really get going, Senior Chief. It's been a long day." Martinez studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Fair enough. But Ms. Chen, whatever you're doing here, whatever your real story is, be careful. Dawson's got connections, and he's the kind of guy who holds grudges. This stolen valor thing, he's going to make sure everyone knows about it. You're going to have a target on your back now." "I appreciate the warning, Senior Chief." "Do you?" Martinez pushed off from the car, then paused. "One more thing. When you got that tattoo, assuming you got it for legitimate reasons, did the artist tell you what those specific wing patterns mean?" Sarah's hand went unconsciously to her arm, fingers tracing over the fabric of her sleeve. "He mentioned they were traditional." "They're traditional for spec ops," Martinez corrected. "Specifically for DevGru operators. Most people wouldn't know the difference, but anyone who served at that level would recognize those patterns immediately. So whoever did your ink either knew exactly what they were doing, or you got very, very lucky with your artistic choices." He walked away before she could respond, leaving Sarah standing alone in the parking lot with the uncomfortable knowledge that her cover was thinner than she'd thought. She drove home to her small apartment off base, maintained as part of her cover, and spent the evening writing up her daily observations in encrypted format. 47 security vulnerabilities documented, 3 insider threats identified, counterintelligence assessment proceeding on schedule. But now there was a complication. Marcus Martinez. The Senior Chief had seen too much, put too many pieces together. If he started asking the right questions to the right people, he could compromise the entire operation. Sarah pulled up his service record on her secure tablet. 25 years in service, multiple combat deployments, Silver Star, 2 Bronze Stars, Purple Heart, and notably served as an instructor at Advanced Special Operations Training, which meant he'd worked with DevGru personnel, would have known their operational patterns, their tradecraft, their methods. No wonder he'd recognized the signs. She made a note in her report. Potential compromise by Senior Chief Marcus Martinez. Recommend assessment of whether to bring him into operational awareness. Then she sat back and stared at the tattoo on her arm, the trident she'd earned through 6 months of the hardest training in the world. The wings she'd gotten after her first successful mission, the campaign markers that represented operations she couldn't talk about for another 20 years. 3 more weeks of being invisible. 3 more weeks of being mocked for wearing symbols she'd earned with blood and sacrifice. 3 more weeks of playing a role while her actual identity remained hidden. Commander Sarah Chen, call sign Spectre 6, closed her laptop and permitted herself a rare moment of frustration. Then she pushed it aside, compartmentalized the emotion the way she'd been trained to do, and started preparing for tomorrow. The mission came first, always, even when it cost her the right to defend her own honor. The next 2 weeks turned Sarah's careful invisibility into something closer to infamy. Lieutenant Dawson had made good on his implicit threat, ensuring that the story of the stolen valor janitor spread through Naval Amphibious Base Coronado like wildfire through dry brush. The comments evolved from disgusted looks to active mockery. During her morning rounds on Tuesday, Sarah passed a group of Bud S candidates doing push-ups in the courtyard. One of them, spotting her, called out, "Hey, maybe the janitor can teach us some SEAL techniques. She's got the tattoo, so she must know all about it, right?" His classmates erupted in laughter, and even their instructor, a grizzled chief with 20 years of service, allowed himself a thin smile before barking at them to focus on their form. Sarah kept walking, kept her face neutral, kept her hands steady on her cleaning cart. But inside, a part of her cataloged the instructor's face, made a note. Chief Henderson, Bud S instructor, permits mockery of supposed civilian. Leadership failure would not occur if he knew the truth. On Thursday, someone had taped a printed image of a Navy SEAL trident to her locker in the maintenance office. Across it, in red marker, someone had written, "Stolen valor swang federal crime." She removed it quietly, threw it away, and said nothing to her supervisor, a retired Navy logistics specialist who ran the maintenance department with efficient indifference to interpersonal drama. Friday brought a new low. Sarah was cleaning the windows in the main administrative building when she overheard a conversation between 2 lieutenants, one of them Dawson, discussing her situation. "I've got a buddy in base security," Dawson was saying, his voice carrying through the thin walls. "Asked him to run a deeper background check on her. There's something off about the whole thing. Secret clearance for a janitor, and nobody can tell me who actually authorized her assignment here." "Maybe she's just connected," the other lieutenant suggested. "You know how it is. Somebody's cousin needs a job, pulls some strings." "Maybe. But I'm thinking about filing a formal complaint with NCIS. Stolen valor is a federal offense. If she's been going around claiming to be a SEAL, has she actually claimed that, though?" The second lieutenant interrupted. "I mean, having a tattoo isn't technically illegal. Stupid and disrespectful, sure, but not illegal unless she's actively misrepresenting herself." Dawson made a frustrated sound. "The tattoo itself is misrepresentation. Nobody gets a trident inked unless they're trying to claim they earned it." Sarah moved her window cleaning to a different section, out of earshot. An NCIS investigation would be complicated, not fatal to her mission. Her cover was legitimate, backstopped by actual Navy intelligence, but it would draw attention from people with the authority and resources to dig deeper than Dawson could on his own. She made another encrypted note in her evening report: possible NCIS involvement. Recommend consideration of early mission termination or identity disclosure. The response came back within 6 hours, a terse message from her handler. Mission parameters unchanged. Assessment must be completed. Maintain cover. 21 days remaining. 21 days, 3 more weeks of this. Senior Chief Martinez continued to watch her with undisguised curiosity. Unlike Dawson's hostile surveillance, Martinez's attention felt more like professional assessment, a puzzle he was trying to solve, not an enemy he was trying to destroy. On Monday of the 3rd week, he approached her while she was restocking paper towels in the SEALs' locker room during their training hours. The room was empty, except for them, which Sarah suspected wasn't coincidental. "Ms. Chen," he said, his tone conversational. "Mind if I ask you something?" "Of course not, Senior Chief." She continued her work, but her awareness heightened. "Why haven't you defended yourself?" Martinez leaned against a locker, arms crossed. "I've been watching how people treat you. The comments, the jokes, the outright hostility. You just take it. Never argue back, never try to explain. That takes either incredible patience or incredible discipline." Sarah placed the last roll of paper towels in the dispenser before turning to face him. "What would be the point of defending myself, Senior Chief? Would anyone believe me?" "Depends what your defense is." His eyes were sharp, searching. "You could tell them it's just a tattoo that doesn't mean anything. You could say you got it to honor a family member who served. You could claim temporary insanity or youthful stupidity or any number of excuses, but you haven't. You just endure." "Maybe I'm just not good with confrontation," Sarah offered. Martinez's expression said he didn't believe that for a second. "Ms. Chen, I've spent 25 years around operators, special warfare personnel. You know what they all have in common? Discipline under pressure, the ability to maintain cover even when it costs them personally, the capacity to prioritize mission over ego." The air in the locker room suddenly felt thinner. Sarah kept her expression neutral, but her mind was racing through contingency plans. If Martinez pushed much harder, she'd need to make a decision. Bring him into operational awareness or find a way to transfer him off base before he compromised everything. "I'm just a janitor, Senior Chief," she said quietly. "I clean floors and restock supplies, that's all." "Right." Martinez pushed off the locker and headed for the exit, then paused at the door. "You know what's funny? I pulled the personnel files for every custodial worker on this base. Want to know what I found?" Sarah waited, knowing this was the moment that could unravel everything. "You're the only one with a secret clearance," Martinez continued. "The only one whose background check was processed through Navy intelligence instead of standard civilian channels. The only one whose previous employment history is suspiciously vague, and the only one who happens to be in her early 30s, right around the age that a SEAL who graduated Bud S 7 years ago would be now. That's quite a conspiracy theory, Senior Chief." "Is it?" He smiled, but there was no humor in it. "Because here's what I think. I think you're here for a reason that has nothing to do with cleaning. I think that tattoo on your arm is exactly what it looks like. Legitimate service ink. And I think whatever you're really doing here is important enough that you're willing to endure 3 weeks of being called a valor thief rather than break cover." Sarah met his gaze steadily. "If I were here for some other reason, Senior Chief, don't you think I'd have better operational security than getting my tattoo exposed in a hallway confrontation?" "Actually," Martinez said thoughtfully, "that's the part that convinced me, because the way you reacted wasn't panic or anger, it was annoyance at a tactical error. You were mad at yourself for letting your sleeve ride up, not worried about getting caught. That's operator thinking." He left before she could respond, leaving Sarah alone in the locker room with the uncomfortable knowledge that Senior Chief Marcus Martinez had essentially figured out her entire operation through pure observation and tactical intuition. That evening she filed another report. Critical. Senior Chief Marcus Martinez has likely compromised operational cover through deductive reasoning. Recommend immediate assessment for inclusion in operational awareness or removal from base. The response came within 2 hours. Martinez cleared. Authorized for operational awareness if necessary. Your discretion on timing. So now she had authorization to read Martinez in on the operation if the situation demanded it. The question was whether that would help or hurt the mission's final 3 weeks. The decision was made for her 4 days later at 0347 hours on a Wednesday morning that would change everything. Sarah was in her apartment deep in REM sleep when her phone erupted with an emergency alert that dragged her instantly awake. Years of training kicked in before conscious thought. She was out of bed, phone in hand, adrenaline spiking before her eyes had fully focused. The message was stark and terrifying. Emergency alert, Naval Amphibious Base, Coronado security breach, hostile infiltration, all personnel report to designated stations. This is not a drill. Sarah was dressed in 30 seconds. Not in her janitor coveralls, but in dark tactical clothing she kept ready in her closet. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency. Cargo pants, moisture-wicking shirt, boots designed for rapid movement. She grabbed her go-bag, which officially didn't exist as part of her janitor cover, and was in her car within 90 seconds of the alarm. The base was 12 minutes away at legal speeds. She made it in 7. The main gate was chaos. Military police scrambling, vehicles being waved through with minimal checks, personnel streaming in from all directions. Sarah flashed her ID badge, and the MP barely glanced at it before waving her through. Everyone's training had kicked in. The normal peacetime protocols had vanished, replaced by wartime response patterns. She parked in the civilian lot and ran toward the main complex, her mind already analyzing the tactical situation. Security breach, hostile infiltration. Those weren't phrases the Navy used lightly. This was real, immediate, and dangerous. The main building was lit up like a Christmas tree, every light blazing. Personnel in various states of uniform readiness were converging on the building, some still pulling on shirts or boots as they ran. Sarah joined the flow, just another body in the chaos, but her eyes were cataloging everything, where the armed guards were positioned, which entrances were secured, where the obvious defensive gaps existed. She'd documented those gaps. That's what her 3 months here had been about, finding every weakness in the base's security so they could be fixed. And now, apparently, someone was exploiting them. The main corridor was packed with SEALs, instructors, administrative personnel, and support staff. Lieutenant Dawson was there, shouting orders at junior enlisted who looked confused about their assignments. Several senior chiefs were trying to establish a command structure, but the chaos was preventing effective coordination. Don't know how many infiltrators. Communications are compromised. Possible hostage situation in Building 7. Need armed response teams. Sarah pushed through the crowd toward the command center, where she could see base leadership trying to establish situational awareness. That's when she heard the voice that made her blood run cold. Through the open door of a conference room, someone was speaking in Arabic, not the formal classical Arabic taught in most military language courses, but the specific dialectical Arabic spoken in certain parts of Syria, and they were using tactical terminology, phrases for coordinated assault, breach procedures, target acquisition. She pushed closer and glimpsed the speaker through the doorway. A man in Navy utility uniform, corporal rank insignia, speaking urgently into a cell phone. His uniform was perfect, his bearing was military, but his words were giving tactical updates to hostile forces, one of the insider threats, one of the 3 she'd identified during her assessment. Sarah's mind raced. She documented this man, Corporal Ahmed Hassan, transferred in 8 months ago, clean background check, but with suspicious patterns in his communication logs and unexplained absences. Her report had flagged him as a potential compromise, but further investigation had been scheduled for after her assessment was complete. Too late now. Hassan finished his call and moved quickly out of the conference room, heading toward the rear of the building. Sarah followed at a distance, her training taking over. She needed to know what he was doing, where he was going, what the full scope of the attack was. She also needed to decide, maintain cover as a janitor and try to alert someone in authority, or break cover and handle this herself. The decision point arrived when Hassan ducked into a maintenance corridor. One of the routes Sarah knew intimately from her 3 months of cleaning, and emerged with a tactical bag that had been hidden behind a false panel in the wall. One of the security vulnerabilities she'd documented. Maintenance corridors with inadequate surveillance and multiple hiding spots for cached equipment. Hassan opened the bag and pulled out weapons, a compact submachine gun, additional magazines, what looked like breaching charges. He was arming himself for an assault, and he was doing it in a blind spot of the base's security coverage. Sarah made her decision. She stepped out of the shadows behind him, and her voice, when she spoke, wasn't the quiet, deferential tone of a janitor. It was the command voice of a naval officer who'd led tactical operations in 3 combat zones. "Corporal Hassan, put the weapon down, now." Hassan spun, his face showing shock that someone had followed him into this supposedly secure location. Then his expression shifted to recognition. He'd seen her around the base, the janitor woman everyone had been mocking, and confusion. "Get out of here, lady," he snapped, his English now carrying the accent he'd been carefully hiding. "This doesn't concern you." "Put the weapon down," Sarah repeated, her voice flat and cold. "You have 3 seconds to comply." Hassan's face showed disbelief, then contempt. "You're the stolen valor bitch everyone's been laughing about. Get lost before you get hurt." He raised the submachine gun, not quite pointing it at her, but making the threat clear. Sarah moved. Years of training, hundreds of hours of close-quarters combat drills, muscle memory forged in actual combat situations, all of it activated in a blur of motion that Hassan's brain couldn't process fast enough to counter. She closed the distance before he could bring the weapon fully to bear, trapped the barrel against her body, drove her elbow into his throat with precise force calculated to stun but not kill, then used his momentary paralysis to strip the weapon from his hands with a disarming technique that only special operations personnel were taught. Hassan dropped, gasping, and Sarah had the submachine gun pointed at him before he'd fully registered what had happened. "Stay down," she ordered, then into the chaos of the corridor behind her. "I need security in Maintenance Corridor 7. Hostile infiltrators subdued." Boots thundered in response to her shout. Within seconds, 3 SEALs rounded the corner, weapons raised, then stopped in shock at the scene before them. The janitor, the woman with the stolen valor tattoo, standing over an armed infiltrator, holding his weapon with perfect tactical form, her entire bearing radiating trained competence that couldn't be faked. "Secure the prisoner," Sarah commanded, not lowering her weapon until one of the SEALs had Hassan in restraints. "He's been communicating with external hostile forces. His bag contains additional weapons and breaching charges. Search him for communication devices." The SEALs moved automatically to comply with her orders before their conscious minds caught up with the fact that they were taking commands from a civilian janitor. One of them, a young petty officer, stared at her with his mouth literally hanging open. "Ma'am, who are you?" "Later," Sarah said tersely. "Right now we need to—" The explosion cut off her words. The sound came from the direction of Building 7, the SEAL training facility. and it was immediately followed by the distinctive crack of automatic weapons fire. Screams echoed through the corridors, and the emergency alarms that had been blaring steadily shifted to a different, more urgent pattern. Active hostile engagement. All personnel take cover. Armed response teams to Building 7. Through the windows, Sarah could see muzzle flashes in the darkness. Multiple shooters, coordinated fire, professional tactics. This wasn't a random attack or an act of terrorism by amateurs. This was a planned military-style assault on a U.S. naval base, and it was happening right now. She handed the submachine gun to the nearest SEAL. Get Hassan to the command center. Tell them there are at least 2 more infiltrators on base. Check personnel records for Petty Officer James Keller and Seaman Michelle Torres. They're part of the same cell. How do you... The SEAL began, but Sarah was already moving, running toward Building 7 and the sound of gunfire. Behind her, she heard one of the SEALs radio in. Command, this is Petty Officer Richards. We've secured 1 infiltrator in Maintenance Corridor 7, the civilian, the janitor. She took him down, and she's giving tactical intelligence about additional threats. I don't know what the hell is going on, but she's moving like an operator. Sarah barely registered the transmission. Her entire focus had narrowed to the tactical situation ahead. Building 7 housed 40 SEAL trainees who were in the middle of Hell Week, exhausted, unarmed, vulnerable. If hostile forces had breached that building, they had dozens of potential hostages who were in no condition to fight back. She burst through the emergency exit and into the courtyard separating the main complex from Building 7. The scene was chaos. Instructors trying to organize defensive positions, trainees being hustled toward secure areas, and incoming fire from multiple positions that suggested the attackers had established overlapping fields of fire. Professional, tactical. Someone had planned this operation using detailed knowledge of the base's layout and response protocols. Someone had used the exact vulnerabilities that Sarah had documented in her assessment. Lieutenant Dawson was crouched behind a concrete barrier, shouting into a radio with panic clear in his voice. Need QRF now. We've got at least 6 hostiles with automatic weapons, and they've taken positions in the training facility. We can't get to the trainees. Sarah assessed the situation with tactical clarity born from years of experience. The attackers had positioned themselves in 3 primary positions, second-floor windows of Building 7, giving them high ground and overlapping fields of fire. Anyone trying to approach across the open courtyard would be cut down. Standard response would be to wait for the quick reaction force, specially trained security personnel who could conduct an armed assault. But that would take time, and every minute those trainees were trapped with armed hostiles increased the likelihood of casualties. She needed to get inside that building, and she needed to do it now. Lieutenant Dawson, she called out, moving to his position behind the concrete barrier. He turned, and his face cycled through shock, confusion, and anger in rapid succession. What the hell are you doing here? Civilians need to evacuate. How many trainees are trapped in Building 7? That's not your... How many? Her voice carried command authority that made Dawson respond automatically. 42, plus 3 instructors, but they're pinned down in the barracks section. The hostiles control the main entrance and the stairwells. Sarah nodded, her mind already mapping the building's layout. She'd cleaned every inch of that facility over the past 3 months. She knew where the service entrances were, which ventilation shafts were large enough for human passage, where the blind spots in the corridors existed. There's a maintenance entrance on the north side, she said. It's not visible from any of those firing positions. The door opens into a utility corridor that connects to the barracks section through the mechanical room. Dawson stared at her. How the hell do you know that? Because I'm not actually a janitor. Sarah pulled her ID badge out of her pocket, the one she'd been carrying for 3 months, and turned it over. On the reverse side, invisible under normal light but revealed when she pressed a specific corner, was her actual identification. Commander Sarah Chen, U.S. Navy, Special Warfare Development Group, Classified Operations. Dawson's face went white. "I've been running a security assessment on this base for 3 months," Sarah continued, her voice crisp and professional. "I documented 47 vulnerabilities, including the ones these attackers are currently exploiting. I also identified 3 insider threats, one of whom is currently in custody, and 2 more who are probably supporting this assault." Your spec ops?" Dawson's voice cracked slightly. "I'm a SEAL commander, Lieutenant, and right now I need you to get your people organized for suppressive fire while I access that maintenance entrance and extract the trainees. You can't go in there alone. I can and I will, but I need covering fire when I move across that exposure point." She pointed to a 15-foot gap between their current position and the corner of Building 7 where the maintenance entrance was located. "Can you provide that?" Dawson was still processing, his mind clearly struggling to reconcile the stolen valor janitor he'd been mocking for weeks with the tactical authority she was now displaying. But his training won out over his confusion. "Chief Morrison," he shouted to a senior enlisted nearby, "get your team ready to provide suppressive fire on my mark. Target those second-floor windows." Senior Chief Martinez appeared from behind an adjacent barrier, his face showing immediate recognition when he saw Sarah. Unlike Dawson, he didn't look shocked. He looked grimly satisfied, like someone whose suspicions had just been confirmed. "Commander Chen," he said, and the way he said her rank made it clear he'd already figured most of this out. "Welcome back to the real Navy, ma'am. If you're hooked on this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more inspiring military stories like this one." Sarah allowed herself a brief smile. "Good to be back, Senior Chief. I'm going to need your team to provide security once I get those trainees out. Can you set up a rally point at the medical building?" "Already done, ma'am." Martinez gestured to a group of SEALs who were establishing a defensive perimeter. "We'll be ready." "Outstanding." Sarah turned back to Dawson. "On your signal, Lieutenant." Dawson took a deep breath, seeming to finally accept the reality of the situation. He raised his hand, and Sarah coiled her muscles, ready to move. "All units, suppressive fire on my mark. 3, 2, 1, mark." The night erupted in gunfire as every weapon on their side of the courtyard opened up on the second-floor windows. The hostile fire slackened immediately as the attackers were forced to take cover. Sarah moved. She crossed the exposed ground in a flat sprint that ate up the distance in seconds, her body remembering every movement pattern from countless training exercises. Bullets cracked past her. The hostiles had recovered faster than expected, but she was already diving into the shadows beside Building 7's north wall. The maintenance entrance was exactly where she remembered, a heavy steel door with a cipher lock that should have required a code. Should have. But during her assessment, she documented that the lock had a manufacturing defect that allowed it to be bypassed by manipulating the latch mechanism in a specific way. 5 seconds, and she was through the door and into the darkness of the utility corridor. The sound of her breathing filled the enclosed space, harsh and controlled. She had no weapon except for a tactical knife she'd grabbed from her go-bag. Not ideal for an armed rescue, but she'd worked with less in worse situations. Moving through the darkness, she navigated by memory and touch. 30 feet down the corridor, turn left, through the mechanical room where the HVAC systems hummed their perpetual song, then up a short flight of stairs to the door that opened into the barracks section. She could hear voices now, frightened voices, young men who'd been in training for months. but who'd never expected to face actual combat on American soil. Can't get out the main exits. Heard gunfire, someone shooting. Where are the instructors? Sarah eased the door open a crack and assessed the situation. 42 trainees, all in various states of exhaustion from Hell Week, were huddled in small groups throughout the barracks bay. 3 instructors were with them, 2 armed with service pistols, but they looked uncertain. This situation was outside their training parameters. And at the far end of the bay, blocking the main exit, 2 hostile figures in U.S. Navy uniforms were visible through the doorway, their automatic weapons clearly intimidating anyone from attempting to leave. Sarah pushed the door open and stepped into the bay. Every head turned toward her, toward the janitor woman they'd all seen being mocked for her stolen valor tattoo, and confusion rippled through the crowd. "Everyone stay calm," Sarah said quietly, her voice carrying authority that silenced the murmurs. "I'm Commander Sarah Chen, Naval Special Warfare. I'm here to get you out." One of the instructors, a lieutenant she recognized, stepped forward, his expression skeptical. "Ma'am, with respect, we were told the janitor had a fake tattoo." "The tattoo is real, Lieutenant. So is my rank. And right now, we don't have time for explanations." She moved deeper into the bay, and her entire bearing had shifted. Gone was the submissive janitor posture, replaced by the command presence of someone who'd led tactical operations in combat zones. "We're evacuating through the utility corridor, single file, absolute silence, weapons disciplined if you're armed. The hostiles don't know about that exit, and I'd like to keep it that way." The trainees were staring at her with expressions ranging from shock to disbelief to dawning comprehension. One of them, a young candidate she'd cleaned past a dozen times, whispered, "Holy shit, she's real. The tattoo. She's an actual SEAL." "Petty officer," Sarah addressed him directly, her voice firm but not harsh. "You'll have time to process that later. Right now, I need you and everyone else to move quickly and quietly toward that door." She pointed to the utility corridor entrance. "Stay low, stay quiet, and when you get outside, Senior Chief Martinez will direct you to the rally point. Understood?" "Yes, ma'am," he replied automatically, coming to attention despite his exhaustion and fear. The evacuation began, trainees filing past her with wide eyes and shocked expressions. Sarah positioned herself near the corridor entrance, watching both the main bay and the hallway where the hostile forces were positioned. If they noticed the evacuation, she'd need to buy time for the trainees to escape. One of the instructors approached her, the skeptical lieutenant from before. Up close, he could see details that hadn't been visible across the bay. The way she held herself, the tactical awareness in her movements, the absolute confidence that came from real combat experience. "Commander," he said quietly, "I owe you an apology. We all do." "Later, Lieutenant. Right now your trainees need you." She gestured toward the corridor. "Make sure they get to the rally point safely." He nodded and moved to help organize the evacuation. 42 trainees, 3 instructors, all filing past the janitor who wasn't a janitor, their faces showing the moment when perception shattered and reality reassembled into something completely different. The last trainee was just entering the corridor when Sarah heard voices from the main hallway, the hostiles, speaking in that same Syrian dialect she'd heard from Hassan earlier. They were doing a sweep, checking that the trainees were still contained. She had perhaps 30 seconds before they reached the barracks bay and discovered the evacuation. Sarah made a quick decision. She couldn't let them sound an alarm that would alert other hostile forces, which meant she needed to neutralize them, 2 armed attackers, and she had only a tactical knife. Not ideal odds, but she'd faced worse. She moved silently toward the bay entrance, positioning herself behind a wall locker that provided cover and concealment. Through a gap in the lockers, she could see the two hostiles approaching, both armed with automatic weapons, both moving with professional tactical awareness. They entered the bay, and their reactions were immediate. The space was empty. 42 trainees who should have been there were gone. One of them raised his radio to report, and Sarah moved. She covered the distance in 3 strides, absolutely silent, and drove her knife into the first hostile's hand before he could key the radio transmit button. His scream was cut off by her follow-up strike, a precise blow to his throat that crushed his windpipe without killing him. He dropped, gasping and unable to make sound. The second hostile was faster, already swinging his weapon toward her, but Sarah was inside his arc of fire before he could bring the barrel to bear. She used a disarming technique that leveraged his own grip against him, stripped the weapon away, and delivered a controlled strike to his temple that dropped him unconscious. 5 seconds. 2 hostile forces neutralized. 0 shots fired. Sarah secured both weapons, zip-tied both attackers using ties from her pocket, and then keyed her own radio, one she'd pulled from her go-bag. "Command, this is Spectre 6. Building 7 barracks section secure. 42 trainees and 3 instructors evacuated through secondary route. 2 hostiles in custody. Requesting QRF sweep of remaining building sections." There was a long pause on the other end of the radio, then a voice she recognized. Captain Richardson, the base commander who'd authorized her undercover assessment, responded with barely contained emotion in his voice. "Spectre 6, this is Command Actual. Good to hear your voice on Tactical Net. QRF is inbound to your position. Outstanding work." "Thank you, sir. Spectre 6 standing by." She remained in position, guarding the 2 subdued hostiles until the quick reaction force arrived 3 minutes later. The team leader, a master chief she'd never met, took one look at her, then at the secured hostiles, then back at her with an expression of deep respect. "Commander Chen?" he asked. "That's right, Master Chief." "Ma'am, we've heard, there were rumors about someone undercover on base, but—" He shook his head. "Permission to speak freely, ma'am." "Granted." "That was some seriously badass work, Commander. 2 hostiles armed and you took them down with a knife?" Sarah allowed herself a small smile. "The knife was mostly for intimidation, Master Chief. Proper technique is usually enough." His team secured the prisoners and swept the rest of Building 7. Finding no additional hostile forces, the assault had been contained. The trainees were safe, and the base was slowly transitioning from emergency response to security lockdown and investigation mode. Sarah walked out of Building 7 into the pre-dawn darkness, and the scene that greeted her was surreal. Dozens of SEALs, instructors, security personnel, and base staff all staring at her with expressions ranging from shock to disbelief to dawning comprehension. Lieutenant Dawson stood near the front of the crowd, his face showing profound confusion and what might have been the beginning of shame. Next to him, Senior Chief Martinez was actually smiling, a small, knowing smile that said, "I told you so without words." And there, standing in the center of the courtyard with perfect military bearing, was a man in his 50s, wearing the insignia of a Rear Admiral. Admiral James Hawthorne, commander of Naval Special Warfare Command. Sarah came to attention and rendered a perfect salute. "Commander Chen," the Admiral said, returning her salute. "I believe you have a situation report for me?" "Yes, sir. Security breach contained. 42 trainees and 3 instructors safely evacuated. 3 hostile infiltrators in custody. Building 7 secure. Ready for full debriefing at your convenience, sir." The Admiral nodded slowly, then turned to address the assembled personnel. "For those of you who don't know," he said, his voice carrying across the silent courtyard, "Commander Sarah Chen has been conducting a classified security assessment of this facility for the past 3 months. Her cover story required her to work as a member of the custodial staff while documenting vulnerabilities in our security protocols. Murmurs spread through the crowd. Several of the SEALs who had been most vocal in their mockery looked like they wanted the ground to swallow them whole. During that assessment, the Admiral continued, Commander Chen identified 47 security vulnerabilities and 3 potential insider threats. Tonight's attack exploited several of those documented vulnerabilities, and her intelligence about the insider threats led directly to the capture of one hostile infiltrator and provided tactical warning about 2 others. He paused, letting that information sink in. Commander Chen is a decorated Navy SEAL with 7 years of service in Naval Special Warfare Development Group. She has completed 3 combat deployments, led numerous classified operations, and holds several commendations for valor, including a Navy Cross. Her cover story required her to endure 3 months of, let's call it misidentification, regarding the legitimacy of her service. She did so without complaint because the mission required it. The silence in the courtyard was absolute. Sarah could see faces in the crowd. Young trainees who'd made airplane noises at her, instructors who'd allowed the mockery to continue, administrative personnel who'd treated her as beneath their notice, and Lieutenant Dawson, whose face had gone from red to white to red again as the full weight of his actions over the past 3 weeks became clear. "Commander Chen," the Admiral said, turning back to her, "you're relieved of your cover assignment. Welcome back to active operational status." "Thank you, sir," Sarah replied, her voice steady despite the emotional weight of the moment. The Admiral stepped closer and lowered his voice, so only she could hear. "That was exceptional work tonight, Commander. You saved lives and prevented what could have been a catastrophic security incident. Well done." "Just doing my job, sir." "It's never just a job when it requires that level of personal sacrifice." He stepped back and raised his voice again. "All personnel, continue with security lockdown protocols. Commander Chen will be available for debriefing once she's had a chance to clean up. Dismissed." The crowd began to disperse, but slowly, many of them still staring at Sarah with expressions of shock and newfound respect. As they moved away, small groups formed, voices rising in urgent conversation as people processed what they'd just learned. Senior Chief Martinez approached, and this time his smile was genuine and warm. "Commander Chen, I have to say, you had me going for a while there. I suspected, but I wasn't completely sure until tonight." "You came closer to figuring it out than anyone else, Senior Chief. Your operational awareness is impressive. 25 years in service teaches you to notice things, ma'am." He paused. "For what it's worth, I'm sorry about how some of the personnel treated you. If I'd been certain earlier, I would have intervened." "You couldn't have intervened without compromising my cover, Chief. You played it exactly right, stayed observant, gathered information, and trusted your instincts." Martinez nodded, then gestured toward the group of trainees who were being processed at the rally point. "Those kids you saved tonight? They're never going to forget this. Hell of a lesson about judging people by appearances." "Hopefully it's a lesson they'll carry forward," Sarah agreed. "We need operators who look beyond the surface." As Martinez moved away to help with security coordination, Sarah was left standing alone in the courtyard, the adrenaline from the tactical operation beginning to fade and leaving behind bone-deep exhaustion. 3 months of playing a role. 3 months of being invisible, dismissed, mocked. 3 months of keeping her true identity hidden while documenting the very vulnerabilities that had nearly been exploited tonight. And now, in the space of a few hours, everything had changed. The janitor was gone. Commander Sarah Chen, call sign Spectre 6, was back. The sun was beginning to rise over Naval Amphibious Base Coronado, painting the Pacific horizon in shades of orange and gold that seemed incongruous with the night's violence. Sarah stood in the command center, still wearing her tactical clothing, providing her formal debrief to Admiral Hawthorne and a room full of senior officers who were rapidly revising their understanding of the base's security posture. The 3 insider threats were all recruited approximately 18 months ago, Sarah explained, pointing to surveillance photos displayed on the large screen. Corporal Hassan was the primary coordinator. Petty Officer Keller provided technical support. He's the one who compromised our communications systems during the initial breach. Seaman Torres worked logistics, smuggling weapons and equipment onto the base over a 6-month period, using her access to supply deliveries. Captain Richardson, the base commander who had authorized her undercover operation, studied the photos with a grim expression. All 3 passed standard background checks. How did they slip through? Sophisticated legend building, Sarah replied. Whoever recruited them invested significant resources in creating believable backgrounds. It wasn't until I ran behavioral pattern analysis, tracking movement logs, communication patterns, and cross-referencing with known insurgent operational methods, that the anomalies became apparent. She pulled up another display showing complex data visualizations. Hassan made 17 personal calls to numbers that traced back to shell companies with links to foreign intelligence services. Keller accessed computer systems outside his authorization parameters 43 times, always during shift changes when oversight was minimal. Torres requisitioned supplies that didn't match any official work orders, and those supplies were never logged into base inventory. Admiral Hawthorne leaned forward. And the attack tonight, was this always their endgame? I believe tonight was accelerated, Sarah said. My assessment was identifying them, and I think they knew their window was closing. The original plan was probably more sophisticated, possibly during a VIP visit or a major training exercise when there would be more targets and more chaos. But once they realized they were being watched, they had to act or abort. Thank God they acted while you were still here, Richardson said quietly. Sarah didn't respond to that, but she allowed herself a moment of private agreement. If the attack had come a month from now, after her assessment was complete, and she'd moved on to her next assignment, the outcome might have been very different. The debriefing continued for another 2 hours, Sarah answering questions about specific vulnerabilities, recommended security enhancements, and tactical response protocols. By the time they finished, it was nearly 800 hours, and she'd been awake for over 24 hours straight. Commander Chen, Admiral Hawthorne said as the room cleared, get some rest. We'll need you for follow-up interviews with NCES and probably some congressional oversight committees, but that can wait until you've recovered. Thank you, sir. Sarah came to attention and saluted. The Admiral returned her salute, then added with a slight smile, and Commander, you might want to consider making yourself available to some of the base personnel later today. I suspect there are quite a few people who'd like to apologize to you personally. Sarah's expression remained neutral, but something flickered in her eyes. That's not necessary, sir. They were responding appropriately to what they believed was stolen valor. I can't fault them for defending something they hold sacred. That's a remarkably generous interpretation, Commander. It's the accurate interpretation, sir. The mission required operational security. They paid the price for that in terms of being kept in the dark. I paid the price in terms of enduring their response. That's the nature of undercover work. Hawthorne studied her for a long moment. You know, Commander, there are very few operators who could have maintained that cover as effectively as you did. The psychological toll of enduring 3 months of that kind of treatment Most people would have broken or gotten angry or made mistakes that compromised the mission. I had good training, sir. You had more than training. You had discipline and perspective, and the kind of emotional intelligence that separates good operators from exceptional ones. He paused. I'm putting you in for a commendation. This operation prevented what could have been a catastrophic loss of life and a major intelligence compromise. Sir, I was just doing my job. Commander. The Admiral's voice carried gentle but firm authority. Learn to accept recognition when it's earned. That's an order. Despite her exhaustion, Sarah smiled. Yes, sir. She returned to her apartment, the small, deliberately modest space that had been her home for 3 months, and finally allowed herself to collapse. Her body knew how to handle adrenaline crashes after tactical operations. She was asleep within minutes of her head hitting the pillow. She woke 6 hours later to her phone buzzing with dozens of messages. Most were official, NCIS scheduling interviews, Navy intelligence requesting detailed reports, her chain of command coordinating next steps, but several were from base personnel, and those were different. Senior Chief Martinez, ma'am, when you're ready, I'd like to buy you a beer and hear some of those stories, the real ones. Lieutenant Williams, Bud S. Instructor, Commander Chen, my sincerest apologies for not recognizing the situation earlier. Would appreciate the chance to speak with you. Petty Officer Richards, from the hallway where she'd subdued Hassan. Ma'am, what you did last night was the most impressive tactical operation I've ever witnessed. Thank you for saving our people. And then, at the bottom of her message list, one from Lieutenant Marcus Dawson, Commander Chen, I need to speak with you. Please. Sarah showered, changed into a fresh uniform, her actual uniform, Navy service khakis with the rank insignia she'd earned and the warfare devices that told the story of her service, and returned to base at 1400 hours. The difference in how people looked at her was immediate and striking. The gate security guard who'd waved her through dozens of times without a second glance now came to attention and rendered a sharp salute. Good afternoon, Commander Chen. Welcome back, ma'am. Thank you, Petty Officer. As she walked through the base toward the command building, every person she passed reacted. Some saluted with obvious respect. Others stared with expressions of shock. Seeing her in uniform with her real rank displayed made the cognitive dissonance even more profound. A few called out greetings or thanks. She passed the building where she'd cleaned windows for 3 months, and a group of young SEALs were standing near the entrance. They fell silent as she approached, and then, without any apparent signal, all 5 came to attention simultaneously. The one in front, she recognized him as one of the candidates who'd made airplane noises at her during PT, spoke with visible embarrassment. Commander Chen, ma'am, we wanted to apologize for how we treated you. We had no idea. At ease, Sarah said gently. You couldn't have known. That was the point of operational security. Ma'am, we still should have been more respectful, another one said. His voice carried genuine regret. You were working on this base, doing a job, and we treated you like you were less than us. That was wrong, regardless of who you turned out to be. Sarah studied their faces, all young, all earnest, all wrestling with a lesson that would probably stay with them for the rest of their careers. You're right, she agreed. It was wrong. Not because I turned out to be an officer, but because respect should be baseline, not something earned through rank. Every person doing a job on this base deserves to be treated with dignity. Janitors, cooks, administrative staff, everyone. They're all supporting the same mission. Yes, ma'am, they chorused. That said, Sarah continued, her expression softening slightly, I understand why the tattoo situation sparked such a strong reaction. The trident means something to all of us who earned it. Your instinct to defend that symbol came from the right place. You just need to balance that protective instinct with better judgment about accusations. One of them, the candidate who'd made the airplane noises, stepped forward. "Ma'am, for what it's worth, I'll never make assumptions about someone based on appearances again. Last night, you saved 42 of our classmates. You're kind of a legend now." Despite herself, Sarah smiled. "I'm not a legend. I'm just a SEAL who did her job, same as any of you will do when the situation demands it." She continued on her way, leaving them staring after her with expressions of deep respect and probably some hero worship that would fade once the adrenaline of the crisis wore off and normal base routine resumed. The command building was busy with the aftermath of the security breach. NCIS agents conducting interviews, security personnel reviewing protocols, administrative staff processing incident reports. Several people stopped what they were doing to acknowledge Sarah as she passed, and the weight of their attention was both gratifying and uncomfortable. She found Senior Chief Martinez in the SEAL team room, reviewing training schedules with several other instructors. He spotted her immediately and excused himself from the group. "Commander," he greeted her with a smile that held genuine warmth and a hint of satisfaction. "You're looking more like yourself in that uniform. Feels better than coveralls, I'll admit." Sarah gestured toward the coffee station. "You offered to buy me a beer, but I'll settle for coffee if you've got a few minutes." "For you, ma'am, I've got all the time you need." They settled into a quiet corner of the team room with steaming mugs, and Martinez studied her with open curiosity. "So, Spectre 6, that's your call sign?" "Has been for 5 years." Sarah sipped her coffee. "Earned it during a mission in Syria. Can't discuss the details, but it involved a lot of observation work and taking out targets before they knew we were there. The team started calling me Spectre and it stuck." "Appropriate." Martinez leaned back in his chair. "I have to admit, Commander, you had me going for a while. I suspected something was off, but I kept second-guessing myself. Seemed too unlikely that an actual SEAL would be working as a janitor." "That's exactly why the cover worked," Sarah replied. "People see what they expect to see. A woman in custodial coveralls matches the schema for janitor, so that's what registers. The few inconsistencies, movement patterns, tactical awareness, the tattoo details get dismissed as anomalies rather than evidence." "The tattoo details," Martinez repeated. "That's what finally convinced me. Those campaign markers were too specific, too accurate, and the way the trident itself was rendered, that wasn't something you get from a Google image search. That was ink done by someone who knew exactly what they were creating." Sarah pulled up her sleeve, revealing the full tattoo now that she wasn't hiding it. The SEAL trident was beautifully rendered, the eagle clutching the anchor and trident with detailed featherwork. Surrounding it were small symbols that Martinez examined closely, marks indicating East Africa operations, Philippines deployment, Syria missions. And beneath it all, rendered in careful script, Spectre 6. "Master Chief Peterson in Virginia Beach," Sarah said. "Retired SEAL, runs a shop that only inks military tattoos for people who've actually earned them. He checks DD-214s before he'll even discuss designs." "Smart man," Martinez traced one of the campaign markers with his finger. "Syria, that was rough work. You served there?" 2 deployments, 2015 and 2017. Did some things I can't talk about, saw some things I wish I could forget." His expression grew distant for a moment, then refocused. "You were there in 2017? Can't confirm specific dates or missions, but let's just say our paths might have crossed indirectly." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. Two operators who'd both paid their dues in the same harsh theater, both carrying memories they couldn't discuss in detail. "The thing I keep thinking about," Martinez said finally, "is how you handled those 3 months. The comments, the mockery, the outright hostility. I've known operators who couldn't handle being undercover for 3 weeks without their tempers getting the better of them. But you never broke character, never defended yourself, never got angry, never gave anyone a reason to suspect. It helped that I was genuinely angry about the security vulnerabilities, Sarah admitted. Every time someone made a comment about my tattoo, I'd channel that frustration into my assessment work. Found 2 additional vulnerabilities specifically because I was doing extra thorough inspections while pissed off about being called a valor thief. Martinez laughed, a genuine, appreciative sound. That's the most SEAL thing I've ever heard, using anger as motivation for better tactical analysis. We work with what we've got, Chief. That we do, ma'am, that we do. The door to the team room opened, and Lieutenant Dawson entered, his uniform crisp, but his face showing the kind of stress that came from profound embarrassment and guilt. He spotted Sarah immediately, and something like panic flickered across his features before he schooled his expression into professional neutrality. Martinez noticed and stood smoothly. I should get back to the training schedule. Commander, it's been an honor. He saluted, and Sarah returned it, then watched as he gave Dawson a look that clearly said, "Don't screw this up before leaving them alone." Dawson approached slowly, each step seeming to cost him effort. When he reached Sarah's position, he came to rigid attention and saluted with textbook precision. "Commander Chen, ma'am, permission to speak freely." Sarah returned his salute and gestured to the chair Martinez had vacated. "At ease, Lieutenant. Have a seat." Dawson sat, but his posture remained stiff, formal. He looked like a man facing a court-martial, which, given his behavior over the past 3 weeks, probably wasn't far from what he expected. "Ma'am," he began, his voice tight with controlled emotion, "I need to apologize for everything. The way I spoke to you, the way I treated you, the stolen valor accusations, questioning your credentials, making sure everyone on base knew about the situation, all of it was—" He stopped, searching for words. It was completely inappropriate and unprofessional. Sarah studied him carefully. Dawson was young, ambitious, and had made serious errors in judgment. But he'd also responded competently during the crisis, once he understood the situation. The question was whether his apology came from genuine understanding or just fear of consequences. "Lieutenant," she said quietly, "why did you treat me the way you did?" The question seemed to surprise him. "Ma'am, I saw the tattoo, and I assumed—" "I know what you assumed. I'm asking why that assumption led to the specific behaviors you chose. Why public mockery instead of a private conversation? Why ensuring everyone knew about it instead of a quiet report to security? Why the ongoing campaign of making sure I felt unwelcome?" Dawson's face flushed. I don't have a good answer for that, ma'am." "Try anyway." He was silent for a long moment, clearly wrestling with something. Finally, in a voice barely above a whisper, "Because it made me feel superior. Because I'm a commissioned officer and I thought you were just a janitor. Someone I could look down on without consequences, someone who couldn't fight back." The honesty of the answer caught Sarah off guard. She'd expected excuses, justifications, maybe claims about defending the honor of the SEAL community. Instead, Dawson had cut straight to the ugly truth. He'd engaged in what amounted to bullying because he had power and thought she didn't. "That's quite an admission, Lieutenant." "It's the truth, ma'am." Dawson met her eyes now, and Sarah could see genuine shame there. "I've spent the last 12 hours thinking about what I did, and there's no way to frame it that doesn't make me look like an asshole. I was an asshole. I used the stolen valor issue as an excuse to treat someone badly because I thought I could get away with it. And now? Now I understand that even if you had been just a civilian janitor, even if that tattoo had been actual stolen valor, The way I behaved was still wrong. His voice grew stronger, more certain. Respectful confrontation, a private report to security, maybe an educational conversation about why military symbols are important, those would have been appropriate responses. Public mockery and a sustained campaign of humiliation? That was abuse of power, plain and simple. Sarah leaned back in her chair, processing. In her years of service, she'd seen people respond to their mistakes in various ways. Some doubled down, some made excuses, some offered hollow apologies designed only to avoid punishment. Dawson's response was different. He was actually engaging with what he'd done wrong and why it was wrong, regardless of who she'd turned out to be. "Lieutenant Dawson," she said finally, "you're absolutely right. Your behavior was abuse of power. It was also a failure of leadership, a violation of the respect that should exist between all personnel, regardless of rank or position, and a demonstration of exactly the kind of attitude that undermines unity, cohesion, and mission effectiveness." Dawson nodded miserably. "Yes, ma'am. I understand if you want to file a formal complaint. I won't contest it." "I'm not going to file a complaint." His head snapped up, surprise evident on his face. "Ma'am." "I'm not going to file a complaint," Sarah repeated, "because I think you've already learned the lesson that matters. You've acknowledged what you did wrong. You've understood why it was wrong, and you've done so without making excuses or trying to minimize your behavior. That's worth more than any administrative punishment would achieve." I don't deserve that kind of consideration, ma'am." "Maybe not, but here's what you're going to do instead." Sarah leaned forward, her voice taking on the tone of command. "You're going to take this lesson and carry it forward. You're going to remember how it felt to realize you'd been abusing power over someone who couldn't defend themselves, and you're going to use that memory to ensure you never treat anyone that way again. Janitor, junior enlisted, anyone, understood?" "Yes, ma'am, absolutely." "Furthermore," Sarah continued, "you're going to become the kind of officer who intervenes when he sees others engaging in similar behavior, because now you know what it looks like from the inside, which means you're equipped to recognize it and stop it." "I will, ma'am, I promise." Sarah studied him for another moment, then nodded. "All right, Lieutenant. I'm choosing to believe that you're capable of growth and that this experience will make you a better officer. Don't make me regret that choice." "I won't, ma'am, thank you." Dawson stood and saluted again, and this time his expression showed something like hope, mixed with determination. "If I may ask, Commander, how did you do it? How did you endure 3 months of that treatment without breaking?" "Perspective," Sarah replied simply. "I've been shot at in actual combat. I've lost teammates to enemy fire. I've operated in situations where a single mistake would have meant death for me and everyone on my team. Compared to that, some hurt feelings over being called a valor thief?" She shrugged. "It wasn't pleasant, but it wasn't life or death either. I kept my eye on the mission, and I didn't let my ego get in the way of operational effectiveness." That's an incredibly mature way to approach it." "It's the only way to approach undercover work, Lieutenant. The mission always comes first. Everything else, pride, comfort, reputation, has to be secondary. If you can't compartmentalize like that, you can't do this kind of operation." Dawson nodded slowly, absorbing the lesson. "Thank you for your time, ma'am, and for your willingness to give me a chance to learn from this, rather than just punishing me for it." "Don't thank me yet. I'm assigning you additional work." His expression shifted to wary attention. "Ma'am, you're going to work with me over the next 2 weeks to revise the base's security protocols based on my assessment findings. It'll be extra duty on top of your regular responsibilities, and it'll require late nights and detailed analysis. Consider it applied learning about why operational security matters and how assumptions can compromise mission effectiveness. A slow smile spread across Dawson's face. "Yes, ma'am. I'd be honored." After he left, Sarah sat alone in the team room for a few minutes, finishing her coffee and reflecting on the conversation. Dawson's accountability had been genuine, and his willingness to learn from the experience suggested he might actually become a decent officer someday. The question was whether the lesson would stick once the immediate shame and embarrassment faded. Time would tell. The afternoon brought a steady stream of visitors, personnel who wanted to apologize, thank her, or simply process what had happened. Sarah handled each conversation with patience, recognizing that everyone needed to reconcile the person they'd thought she was with the person she actually was. The Bud S trainees she'd rescued were particularly affected. They gathered in small groups outside the command building, and when Sarah emerged around 1600 hours, they immediately came to attention in a spontaneous formation. The young petty officer she'd addressed directly during the evacuation, she'd learned his name was Jensen, stepped forward as their spokesperson. "Commander Chen, ma'am, the candidates from Class 347 wanted to thank you formally for your actions last night. You saved our lives, and we won't forget it." Sarah looked over the group, 42 faces, all showing exhaustion from Hell Week, plus the trauma of last night's events, all staring at her with expressions of profound respect and gratitude. "Petty Officer Jensen," she replied, "you and your classmates performed admirably under extraordinarily difficult circumstances. You maintained discipline during evacuation. You followed orders from an unfamiliar authority figure without hesitation, and you demonstrated the kind of adaptability that makes good SEALs. I was proud to serve with you, even briefly." Jensen's face showed surprise. "Ma'am, we didn't do anything. You were the one who... You stayed calm when armed hostiles had you trapped. You executed a tactical evacuation through an unfamiliar route in complete darkness. You rallied at the designated point and provided accurate head counts to Senior Chief Martinez, which allowed us to confirm everyone was safe. That's not nothing, Petty Officer. That's exactly the kind of performance we need from SEAL operators." The trainees seemed to stand taller at her words, the validation from a decorated commander meaning more than they could articulate. "Ma'am," another trainee spoke up, the one who'd whispered, "She's real," during the evacuation. "Can I ask you something?" "Go ahead." "The tattoo. When we were making those comments during PT, making airplane noises and stuff, did that hurt, knowing you'd actually earned it?" Sarah considered the question carefully. These young men needed an honest answer, not a dismissive one. "Yes," she said simply. "It hurt, not because my ego was bruised, but because that trident represents the hardest 6 months of my life. Hell Week nearly broke me. Second phase training pushed me past limits I didn't know I had. Third phase taught me that excellence requires constant vigilance. When I finally graduated and received my trident, it felt like I'd earned membership in a family, a brotherhood." She paused, making sure they understood the weight of what she was saying. So yes, when people dismissed it as stolen valor, when they made jokes about it, when they treated it like a fashion statement, that hurt. But here's what I learned. The hurt came from a good place. It came from caring about something that matters. Your anger about stolen valor comes from that same place. So while the mockery wasn't pleasant, I understood where it came from, and I respected the instinct behind it. "Even though we were wrong?" Jensen asked quietly. "You were wrong about me specifically," Sarah corrected. "But you weren't wrong to care about the trident's meaning. You weren't wrong to feel protective of something you're working so hard to earn. You were just wrong about the specific facts of this particular situation. That's forgivable. What matters is whether you learn from it." Another trainee, one she recognized as being particularly vocal during the mockery, raised his hand hesitantly. "Ma'am, what should we have done differently? If we see someone with military tattoos in the future and we're not sure if they're legitimate." "Good question." Sarah thought for a moment. "First, remember that not everyone in uniform or with military ink is going to be in a position to prove their credentials immediately. Some people are undercover, like I was. Some are working classified assignments. Some just don't feel the need to justify themselves to strangers." She held up her fingers, counting off points. "Second, if you genuinely suspect stolen valor, actual fraudulent claims of military service, report it through proper channels rather than taking vigilante action. Let security or command investigate. Third, remember that respectful inquiry is different from public humiliation. If you're curious about someone's service, you can ask politely without assuming the worst. And fourth," she added with a slight smile, "remember that the most unlikely people sometimes turn out to be exactly who they claim to be. Stay humble, stay curious, and don't let assumptions override evidence." The trainees absorbed this, several of them nodding thoughtfully. "Ma'am," Jensen said, "Class 347 would like to request your presence at our graduation ceremony, if we make it through Hell Week." "When you make it through Hell Week," Sarah corrected. "When we make it through," Jensen repeated with a grin. "And when we graduate from Bud-S, we'd be honored if you would attend our ceremony." Sarah felt unexpected emotion tighten her throat. These young men had gone from mocking her to inviting her to one of the most important moments of their lives. "It would be my honor, Petty Officer. I'll be there." The formation broke into spontaneous applause, and Sarah allowed herself a genuine smile before dismissing them to return to their training. As the sun began to set over the Pacific, Sarah found herself walking across the base toward the waterfront. The events of the past 30 hours were beginning to catch up with her, the adrenaline crash, the emotional weight of ending her cover, the complex feelings about how the whole situation had resolved. She reached the seawall and stood looking out over the ocean, watching the waves roll in with their eternal rhythm. Somewhere out there, SEAL teams were training in the surf zone. Somewhere further out, sailors were standing watch on ships, protecting American interests. And here, on this base, life was slowly returning to normal after a night of extraordinary violence and revelation. "Commander Chen," a female voice spoke behind her, and Sarah turned to see a Navy captain she didn't recognize approaching. The woman wore the insignia of a Navy psychologist, and her expression was kind but professional. "Captain," Sarah acknowledged, coming to attention. "At ease, Commander. I'm Captain Elizabeth Morrison, Base Psychological Services. Admiral Hawthorne asked me to check in with you, make sure you're processing everything okay." Sarah relaxed slightly. "I appreciate the concern, Captain, but I'm fine. This isn't my first tactical operation." "No, but it's probably your first time operating undercover for 3 months, while being actively mocked for legitimately earned service credentials. That's a unique psychological stressor, Commander." Sarah had to concede the point. "It was challenging, but nothing I couldn't handle." Morrison moved to stand beside her at the seawall, both of them facing the ocean. "You know, there's a reason most undercover operations have strict time limits. Extended deception, pretending to be someone you're not, suppressing your true identity, enduring treatment you don't deserve, takes a psychological toll even on the most disciplined operators." "I completed the mission successfully," Sarah pointed out. "You did, exceptionally so. But completing the mission and being okay aren't the same thing." Morrison's voice was gentle but firm. "I've reviewed your file, Commander. You're one of the most decorated operators in naval special warfare. You've led classified missions that saved lives and advanced national security interests. Your service record is exemplary. I sense a but coming, Captain. But, Morrison continued with a slight smile, operators with your profile also tend to minimize their own emotional responses. You're so accustomed to compartmentalizing, to putting mission first, that you sometimes forget to process the human cost of what you endure. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, watching the sunset paint the ocean in shades of gold and crimson. What do you want me to say, Captain? That it bothered me? That hearing people mock something I nearly died earning made me angry? That watching Lieutenant Dawson work so hard to ensure everyone knew I was a fraud felt like betrayal even though I understood it was part of the cover? That would be a start, yes. Fine, it bothered me. It made me angry. Sometimes lying in bed at night, I'd replay some particularly cutting comment and feel rage that I couldn't express because the mission required silence. Sometimes I'd see my reflection in a window, wearing those coveralls, pushing that mop, and feel like I'd lost myself. Sarah's voice remained controlled, but there was emotion underlying the words now. And sometimes, late at night, I'd look at my tattoo and wonder if I'd made a mistake getting something so personally meaningful in a visible location. That's honest, thank you. But here's the thing, Captain. Sarah turned to face Morrison directly. I'd do it again, without hesitation, because those 47 vulnerabilities I documented, each one of them represented a potential catastrophe. Last night proved that. If I hadn't been here, if I hadn't identified those weaknesses, if I hadn't flagged those insider threats, last night could have been so much worse. So the mission justifies the personal cost. The mission contextualizes the personal cost, Sarah corrected. I'm not happy about what I endured, but I understand why it was necessary, and I believe the outcome justified the approach. That's different from saying it didn't matter or didn't hurt. Morrison nodded slowly. That's a healthier perspective than most operators manage. But, Commander, I'm still going to recommend that you take some time before your next assignment. Decompress, process. Let yourself be Sarah Chen, not Spectre 6, not the janitor, just yourself. I'll consider it, Captain. Thank you. One more thing. Morrison reached into her pocket and pulled out a business card. If you find yourself struggling with any of this, if the anger resurfaces, if you have trouble letting go of the cover identity, if you experience any symptoms of trauma, please reach out. Undercover operations leave psychological footprints, Commander. There's no shame in acknowledging that. Sarah accepted the card. I appreciate it, Captain. After Morrison left, Sarah remained at the seawall for a while longer, watching the last light fade from the sky and stars begin to emerge. The base behind her was settling into evening routine, lights coming on in buildings, personnel heading to barracks or off the base housing, the endless cycle of military life continuing despite the previous night's disruption. Her phone buzzed with another message. This one was from Admiral Hawthorne. Commander Chen, please report to the parade ground at 0900 tomorrow. Dress uniform, that's an order. Sarah read it twice, trying to decode what it meant. Dress uniform for what? A formal debriefing? A disciplinary hearing for some protocol she'd broken during the operation? An award ceremony? She'd find out tomorrow. The next morning, Sarah stood in front of her mirror in her apartment, adjusting her service dress blue uniform. The dark blue jacket and trousers were perfectly pressed, her ribbons arranged in precise rows over her left breast pocket, her seal trident positioned perfectly above them. This was the uniform she wore for official ceremonies, the one that displayed every achievement, every deployment, every commendation she'd earned. She studied her reflection and saw a stranger. After 3 months of deliberately minimizing her presence, of slouching slightly, of keeping her eyes down, of occupying as little space as possible, now she stood at full height, shoulders back, every inch of her bearing radiating the confidence and authority she'd spent months hiding. This was Commander Sarah Chen. This was Spectre 6. This was who she actually was. She arrived at the parade ground at 0845, giving herself time to assess the situation before the scheduled event. What she found made her breath catch. The entire SEAL community from Naval Amphibious Base Coronado was assembled in formation on the parade ground. Not just a few teams, not just the personnel from last night's crisis, everyone. 220 SEALs in dress uniforms, standing in perfect formation, waiting for her. Senior Chief Martinez was standing near the formation's edge, and he caught her eye with a knowing smile. This had been planned, coordinated, probably worked out between him and the other senior enlisted after last night's revelations. Admiral Hawthorne stood on the reviewing platform with Captain Richardson and several other senior officers. When he spotted Sarah approaching, he gestured for her to join him on the platform. "Commander Chen," he said quietly as she climbed the steps. "What you're about to witness is not a formal ceremony. It's not in any regulation or protocol manual. It's something the SEAL community does on rare occasions, when one of our own demonstrates truly exceptional service. Just receive it with the grace and humility you've shown throughout this operation." Sarah's heart was pounding now, though her face remained composed. "Yes, sir." The Admiral turned to face the formation and raised his voice to carry across the parade ground. "Attention to orders." 220 voices responded in perfect unison. "Hoo-yah!" The sound rolled across the parade ground like thunder, a tribal war cry that SEALs used to signal unity, determination, and brotherhood. Sarah felt it resonate in her chest, felt tears prick at her eyes despite her efforts at composure. Admiral Hawthorne continued, "For the past 3 months, Commander Sarah Chen has operated undercover on this base, conducting a classified security assessment that identified critical vulnerabilities in our defensive posture. During that time, she maintained her cover despite personal cost, enduring treatment that would have broken lesser operators. Last night, when hostile forces exploited those very vulnerabilities in an attempted terrorist attack, Commander Chen's tactical actions saved 42 lives and prevented what could have been a catastrophic security breach." He paused, letting his words sink in. Commander Chen is a decorated Navy SEAL with 7 years of service in Naval Special Warfare Development Group. Her call sign is Spectre 6. She has completed 3 combat deployments, led numerous classified operations, and holds commendations including a Navy Cross, 2 Silver Stars, and 3 Bronze Stars with Valor. She is, without question, one of the finest operators this community has ever produced. The Admiral turned to face Sarah directly. "Commander, would you please step forward and face the formation?" Sarah moved to the front of the platform, and for the first time since arriving, she looked directly at the assembled SEALs. 220 faces, all watching her with absolute attention. Some she recognized from her time undercover. Others were strangers called in from off-base assignments specifically for this moment. And then Senior Chief Martinez's voice rang out across the formation. "SEAL teams present, arms." As one unified movement, 220 hands rose in salute. The sound of it, the synchronized snap of fabric, the collective rustle of movement, the unified precision of elite operators rendering honors together, was overwhelming. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. Her eyes burned with tears she refused to let fall. Her heart pounded against her ribs like it was trying to escape. This wasn't just a salute. This was recognition, acceptance, brotherhood. This was the SEAL community telling her, without words, that they saw her. They understood what she'd done. They honored the sacrifice she'd made, and they welcomed her back. Sarah came to rigid attention and returned the salute. Her hand rock steady despite the emotion coursing through her. She held it for every day of those 3 months, for every mocking comment she'd absorbed, for every moment she'd bitten back a defense of herself, for every night she'd lain awake questioning whether the mission was worth the cost. She held it because these men, her brothers, her teammates, her community, were holding theirs. The moment stretched, eternal and perfect, until Admiral Hawthorne's voice finally broke the silence. "Order, arms!" The formation lowered their salutes in perfect synchronization, but nobody moved otherwise. They remained at attention, waiting. Then, from somewhere in the middle of the formation, a single voice called out, "Hoo-yah, Spectre 6!" It was picked up immediately by others. "Hoo-yah!" And then the entire formation erupted, "Hoo-yah! Hoo-yah! Hoo-yah!" The sound rolled over her like a physical force. 220 voices united in a battle cry that transcended words, that carried meaning deeper than language could express. Sarah stood perfectly still, letting it wash over her, letting herself feel it for the first time in 3 months. The pride, the belonging, the recognition of sacrifice made and dues paid. She was Commander Sarah Chen. She was Spectre 6. She was a Navy SEAL, and her community had just told her, in the loudest possible terms, that she was home. After the formation dispersed, Sarah found herself surrounded by SEALs who wanted to shake her hand, share a word, express their respect. Some were young operators who'd been part of the mockery and now carried visible guilt. Others were senior enlisted who'd suspected something was off but hadn't put the pieces together. Still others were from different teams entirely who'd simply come to honor one of their own. Petty Officer Jensen and several of his classmates approached with something behind their backs. Jensen stepped forward as spokesman again. "Ma'am, Class 347 took a vote. We wanted to give you something to apologize for how we treated you and to thank you for saving our lives." He brought his hands forward, revealing a custom-made wooden plaque. Burned into the wood was an image of the SEAL trident, and beneath it, careful lettering, "Commander Sarah Chen, Spectre 6, call sign, earned respect, absolute Class 347, will never forget." Sarah accepted the plaque with hands that trembled slightly despite her control. "Gentlemen, this is thank you. I'll treasure this." "Ma'am," Jensen said quietly, "we learned something important from you, about assumptions, about respect, about what it really means to earn the trident." He gestured to his classmates. "We're going to carry that lesson for the rest of our careers, and we're going to make sure every class after us learns it too." "That's all I could ask for, Petty Officer." As the crowd slowly thinned, Sarah found Lieutenant Dawson waiting at a respectful distance. When she acknowledged him, he approached with visible hesitation. "Commander, I won't take up much of your time. I just wanted you to know that I watched that salute from the edge of the parade ground, and He stopped, searching for words. I understood, maybe for the first time, what I'd actually been doing for 3 months. Those 220 SEALs weren't just honoring your service. They were welcoming you back into a community I'd spent 3 months trying to exclude you from. "Lieutenant, please, ma'am, let me finish." Dawson's voice was steady but laden with emotion. "I can't undo what I did. I can't take back those comments or that mockery or the way I made sure everyone knew about the stolen valor janitor. But I can promise you that I will spend the rest of my career making sure no one else ever experiences what you did. I'm going to be the kind of officer who creates inclusive environments, who questions his assumptions, who treats every person with the dignity they deserve, regardless of rank or position." Sarah studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "That's a worthy goal, Lieutenant. Make it reality." "I will, ma'am. I swear to you I will." That evening, Sarah sat in her apartment, the same small space she'd occupied for 3 months, but which now felt different somehow, less like a cover, more like a temporary way station between assignments. She'd changed out of her dress uniform and into civilian clothes. Jeans and a t-shirt, comfortable and unremarkable. Her tattoo was visible on her arm now, no longer hidden or covered. The seal trident caught the lamplight, the intricate details standing out in sharp relief. "Call sign earned," the plaque had said. "Respect absolute." She thought about the journey that tattoo represented. Hell Week, where she'd been one of only 3 women in a class of 68 candidates, where she'd endured not just the physical torture that everyone faced, but also the constant scrutiny that came from being different, where instructors had made her redo evolutions specifically to prove she could maintain the standard, where she'd finally rung the bell, not to quit, but to signal her completion of the hardest 6 months of training in the American military. She thought about the missions that had followed. 3 combat deployments, operations she couldn't discuss for decades, teammates she'd lost, enemies she'd eliminated, the slow accumulation of scars, physical and psychological, that came from serving at the tip of the spear. She thought about the last 3 months, the deliberate diminishment of self, the patient endurance of mockery, the careful documentation of vulnerabilities while her own credentials were being questioned. And she thought about this morning, 220 salutes held in perfect unison, telling her without words, "We see you, we honor you, welcome home." Her phone buzzed with a final message for the day. Admiral Hawthorne, "Commander Chen, your next assignment is being processed. You have 30 days of leave before you need to report. Use them wisely. Well done, Spectre 6. Sarah smiled and typed back a simple response. "Thank you, sir. It was an honor." She set the phone down and looked at the plaque Jensen had given her, propped against the wall where she could see it from her couch. Class 347 would graduate in another month. She'd be there in dress uniform, watching them receive their tridents and begin their own journeys into naval special warfare. And maybe years from now, one of them would find themselves in an impossible situation. Maybe they'd remember the story of Spectre 6, the commander who'd cleaned floors while documenting vulnerabilities, who'd endured mockery while protecting her community, who'd saved 42 lives while maintaining her cover. Maybe they'd remember that the most important missions don't always come with glory, that sometimes service means enduring discomfort, accepting criticism you don't deserve, sacrificing recognition for the sake of operational security. Maybe they'd remember that respect, real respect, the kind that matters, is earned not through rank or position, but through character and action. Sarah Chen closed her laptop, turned off the lights, and went to bed. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new missions, new opportunities to serve. But tonight, for the first time in 3 months, she slept soundly. Not as a janitor, not as an undercover operator, just as herself. Commander Sarah Chen, Spectre 6, Navy SEAL, home. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe for more military and veteran stories. These true tales keep the courage alive for generations to come. And in the comments, tell us, where are you watching from, and who's the quiet leader you'll never forget?